How are you guys doing today? My name is Rafael Canada, and I am the director for Enfoque Global in Latin America. And I've been asked to talk to you about something that's very dear to my heart, which is mobilizing pastors to missions. And our ministry is mentoring currently about 600 to 650 churches in 15 different countries in Latin America. But one of the greatest assets that we have is that not only do we mentor the church in a missional process that takes about 18 months to go through our mentoring process, but not only do we mentor the church, but at the same time, we mentor the pastor. So today, the reason that we're able to mentor the number of churches that we're mentoring is because we actually have 47 pastors who are actually facilitators for our missional process in different countries here in the U.S. or in Latin America. And these churches, we have helped them to send 107 families who are all now serving amongst unreached people groups. These are all families from Latin America, and they're all families now serving amongst UPGs in unreached people groups. So I want to just take a few minutes and tell you my background. I was a pastor for 25 years. I was a church planter and pastor in Mexico. I was able to start 3 different churches, and we thought that would be the rest of our lives. But it wasn't until God took me to the Middle East and I saw firsthand the need of unreached people groups that He put this burning passion in my heart to reach unreached people groups. Our first response was we wanted to go to be missionaries. At this time, our daughter was in college. This was about 15 years ago. And we put our yes on the table. But God never allowed us to go personally, but He did allow me to make trips back and forth to the Middle East, taking different people, taking different pastors, and that began what is our missional process today. So I'm not going to talk to you about our missional process, but I am going to talk to you specifically about what I deem is the greatest overlooked thing in missions mobilization is mentoring pastors. And the reason that we really emphasize mentoring pastors or mobilizing pastors is because they are the chief influencers within the local church. And there's just no way around it. And as a matter of fact, there shouldn't be a way around it because that is the way that God established is that we do missions through local churches. That's the reason that the local church exists. And therefore, if God has put a pastor there, then we should help him to see the world as God sees the world. So therefore, it is extremely beneficial for someone to mobilize a pastor, even more so than mobilizing candidates to the field. This is the one thing that I saw in the missions mobilization movement in Latin America, that a lot of mobilizers would have these different events, which are very good, and they would go to college campuses, they would go to these different events, and they would get young people very excited. And I speak at some of these events also and speak to young people. And but at the end of the day, these young people, they have to connect back to their local church. So if I mobilize a couple and they go back to a church that's never going to send them to the field, the only thing that's going to happen is they're going to grow frustrated. And many times mobilizers or missions agencies will say, well, you need to mobilize your own church. Well, that's really a big ask because they're brand new into the whole missions world and they would have no idea on how to mobilize their church or their pastor. So we take our responsibility is to mobilize churches, but also at the same time mobilize pastors, because we never work with a local church that the pastor and the entire leadership are not in our mentoring sessions. We don't want to go in the back door and mentor a small group of people from the local church. We want to mentor the local church. So I want to mention to you about 6 or 7 things that I think are key in mentoring local churches and mentoring the pastors of those local churches. The first thing is to emphasize the entirety of God's mission. This is one of the defects that I see with the modern missions movement. They are passionate, just like I am passionate, about unreached people groups. From that first trip that I've made to the Middle East, and now in these last 15 years, over 60 trips, to the Middle East. In just a week, I'll be leaving for Nepal. Then the next month, I'll be in the Middle East. And then by the end of the year, I'll also be in another unreached people groups. Normally 6 times a year, I'm amongst unreached people groups. And we're passionate about unreached people groups. But when you knock on the door of a church that is nominally engaged or not even engaged in missions, and that is your beginning thesis, that's your letter of presentation. Hey, I'm here to mobilize you to the ends of the earth. And there's just not a lot of guys that are really interested in that. They're thinking, I can't even make budget. I don't know. I need to build a new building because we can't fit, or we need to do this, or we need to do that. And many times we're speaking a different language than pastors are speaking. But if we emphasize the entirety of the mission of Christ, which the entirety of the mission of Christ is Acts 1:8, when Jesus said that we'll be his witnesses in our own Jerusalem, in Judea, and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. And this is not progressively, this is simultaneously. So therefore, this is one of the key concepts of our missional process. God has one single mission. He does not have a mission for churches and a mission for missionaries. He doesn't have a mission for the church locally and then another. No, there is a mission behind missions. And the mission behind missions is not to travel. It's not even to cross barriers. The mission behind missions is to make disciples. Then Jesus tells us where he wants his church to make disciples. In our own local communities, in our Jerusalem, in our Judea, in our vast areas that many times we interpret as our country. Then into Samaria, that's different people groups, but in the same geographic location. And then he says, to the ends of the earth. So we really believe that one of the only ways to mobilize an entire church to the mission is to emphasize the entirety of God's mission, that it is both local and global. So therefore, when I approach a pastor, I don't necessarily begin the conversation with unreached people groups. I may begin with, Pastor, I can help you mobilize your people locally in their own Jerusalem and be on mission with God. And if I talk like that, I have this pastor's attention, because most pastors desire to mobilize their own people. We all believe in the theology of Ephesians chapter 4, where God is placed within the body of Christ leadership, and that the role of leadership is to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. The only problem is not a theological problem, it's a practical problem. Most guys don't know how to accomplish that. I studied 8 years in Baptist seminary. I never once learned how to mobilize my people to be on mission with Christ locally, and much less globally. I had all kinds of theological classes. I learned a lot of very good stuff, but I never learned how to mobilize my people locally or globally. So the first thing is you have to emphasize the entirety of God's mission. Number two, have a sincere desire to help them, not just to come and teach them about missions. One of my critiques of a lot of missions mobilizers is that the only time they show up to a local church is when they are going to teach on missions. And so really what pastors perceive is, you're not really here to look for an opportunity to help me be on mission. You're looking for a platform for me to give you a platform, so you can teach on missions, and then we don't even see you again. I never receive a call. And that's very self-centered on our own parts. Now, there's self-centeredness on churches' parts and on pastors' parts as well, and we try to confront those as well. But on this end, many times mobilizers are only looking for opportunities in which they can go in and teach. But if I have the sincere desire to help a pastor really mobilize his people and understand God's mission, that's going to come through in a lot of different ways, and not just in opportunities that they give me the platform in order to teach. And so many times we're just only thinking about our next teaching opportunity instead of really helping the pastor develop a missional mindset. Number three, we need to help pastors connect with missionaries. This is very, very important. Most pastors don't even know missionaries. If you're a missions mobilizer and you don't know missionaries, then you need to either start looking for some missionaries you can connect with, or you need to get into a different vocation, because you cannot be a missions mobilizers and not know anything about where you're mobilizing people to. That is one of the greatest things. So the reason that we have been able to mobilize so many churches, and especially to the area of the unreached, is not only the things that I've just mentioned. Number one, my background is a pastor's background. Number two, my desire is to help them to become missional, but I connect pastors with those that are working on the other side of the world. And all of a sudden, they're not just a photo, they're not just a statistic, they're somebody that they actually know. So this is something very, very needed. We need to establish contact and relationship with those that are serving in the areas that we would eventually like to mobilize the church. And then number four is really just an outgrowth of number three. Help them to establish a strategic prayer strategy, not only for unreached people groups, which is important, but for individual missionaries that are serving amongst unreached people groups. And the reason is so important because people develop relationships with people that they can eventually know. And they're not going to develop a relationship necessarily with an unreached people group, with the Zazas of northern Turkey. They're just not going to develop a relationship there. But if they develop a relationship with the Gomez family, who is serving amongst the Zazas, then all of a sudden, missions becomes very personal to them. They begin to pray for the needs of this family that's ministering amongst this unreached people group. They begin to walk this journey with them. So not only should they begin to pray for them, and the reason this is because in my humble opinion, prayer is the most overlooked missions mobilization strategy that there is. 3 times the Bible says this very same phrase: my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations. 50 years ago, evangelical Christians were known as people of intercessory prayer. We were known as a praying people. We had prayer services, we had prayer chains, we had fasting and prayer. We had all of these different emphasis. We had public prayer in our services where we would stop our services and cry out to God. But today, prayer has just become a transition in our service, and people are just not praying anymore. So if I can help a church really develop a strategy to not only pray for the nations, but pray for individual families who are serving amongst the nations, then it becomes very personal to them. Number 5, invite them and their leaders to go on short-term trips with you. You say, well, I don't take any short-term trips. Well, that's probably one of the things that you need to begin to do, is you need to get out there on the mission field and see where you're trying to mobilize people unto. But invite them. If there is a key that has been a success factor in our journey, is that we are I never go to the Middle East alone, and I always take leaders with me. I'm constantly inviting them and helping them to raise their own funds so that they can go, but I'm always looking for different ways to expose them to what God is doing. That will change their world vision, their world view greater than anything else in the world. I remember a pastor of a church of 10,000 in Colombia, and they had started many churches in Latin America. They'd started actually over 2,000 churches. And they had a sign behind their pulpit that said, "Reaching the Nations." And I took their pastor not only to Turkey, but I took him also to northern Iraq. And when he came back, or before he came back, he confessed to me. He said, "I'll be honest, I did not expect to see the quality of people, Latin Americans, serving on the field." And he said, that has deeply, deeply touched my heart, not only seeing the unreached people groups, but seeing the quality of men and women that have given their lives to serve. And he stood up in the pulpit, and for the first 20 minutes, he could not even speak. He was crying so hard. And he said, we have not been fulfilling what that sign says. We're not reaching the nations. We're reaching Latin America. But if God will give me another 10 years of ministry, I promise you, we will change that into a reality. And all of that changed because a pastor that had traveled all over Latin America had never once traveled into the Middle East and seen unreached people groups and seen Latin Americans serving amongst unreached people groups, and then offer them coaching. Don't be looking necessarily for a platform for you to go in and teach, but coach them in how they can become the chief influencer for missions within their own local congregation. Like I said from the very beginning, one of the key factors to the success of our ministry in helping to send out 108 new families from the churches that we mentor is the fact that we view the pastor as our key ally. He is our best friend. And I work very hard at mobilizing the pastors. Are we 100% successful? Obviously not. I wish we were. But we are successful in mobilizing pastors. And not only that, we're recruiting them to become missions mobilizers. And now they are mentoring other churches in the very same missional process that has helped to mentor and transform their own local church from a church that's just focused on its four walls inside, now a church that's focused on its Jerusalem and all the way to ends of the earth. So thank you very much for this opportunity to share from my heart for just a few minutes, just a small portion of what God has allowed us to do and just a few things that we have learned along the ways. May God bless you.